Hi there, and welcome back to the Fuse Show. Today I am your host, David, and I am a co-founder of Xfusion.io and a co-host of the Fuse Show. Today I'm excited to be joined by my guest, Piyush. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, David.
So Piyush is the co-founder and CTO of Last9.io, a site reliability engineering platform that aims to help to minimize the toil of SREs in their day-to-day decision-making. And could you tell me a little bit about how you came to discover this problem yourself and why you're so passionate about solving it?
Yeah, it's interesting, So I was doing a startup. It was an EdTech company, and I've been a bad student, and I wanted to solve the problem of how education is received. And during the course, and this was starting at the cusp of 2009, 2010, and we went on till 2014. During this period was when internet was probably exploding, like for the non-big companies. Consumer space was growing, mobiles were becoming more prevalent with people. And that's when I think the industry shifted massively towards everything becoming more and more consumable. So many more companies came around at that point of time. And the problems of scale became real. And I was a victim of that problem of scale. We probably couldn't scale our systems very well. And we did, things blew in our face a couple of times every time we went with a mega launch. And that got me really intrigued into how these systems work. And I had been an open source developer prior to that. And so systems weren't new, and always had exposure to what automation means, etc. It just was a reinforcement where I had to handle it head on. And that got me interested into this entire space of automation. What is the cost of not being reliable? The business cost of it. I didn't know it was called site reliability engineering back then. I just thought it was saving your business. And as a couple of startups were done past that, the industry showed me the gap that pretty much everywhere, reliability of a software became a thing of post-deployment checklist and not something that we take into account while building software or while operating. And the fact that reliability is not seen as a product first thing is what made me look around and realize that, look, everybody is actually probably making the same mistakes. And I've had the fortune of also working with some really good engineers and who were into this industry. And that's when the whole idea came together that, look, although this may be an extremely challenging problem to solve, but probably that's where the merit is in solving. So, yeah.
Can you walk me through how you first started building an MVP of your current business? Like, what was the core feature that you feel like had to be in the first version?
I think we're still going through the MVP.
Okay.
So it would be unfair for me to say that, look, we have built the MVP.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. And here in this, the challenge is of heterogeneity. When you look at a software, it is running on a cloud. The cloud could be either AWS or GCP these days, the one of the two popular ones. And underneath that, there could be n number of languages in which the application could be written, which could be using m number of frameworks, which may be running on, these days the container orchestration has kind of, become standard in form of Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So that doesn't change as much. But inside of which the service discoveries, somebody will be using an Istio, somebody will be using a Linkerd. So there is, while the choices are not too many, but there is enough heterogeneity available. And providing observability into a single stack, where you say that, look, let me pick up the one single stack, will not always fit a person's bill, because there is some variation or the other that shows up. So the MVP was really hard to isolate, to say this is the minimum viable product. I think it goes the other way. It was the minimum confidence that we could have that, look, this thing works. So it went the other way. Like there's an internal confidence that you need to give to yourself and to your team as well. That, look, we're probably making a very audacious claim here that everything that engineers have been doing manually all this while could be offloaded to algorithms. The problem of correlation, running algorithms of anomaly detection, etc. And that validation to us was the first step. How do we homogenize the data coming into the system? So how do we build a standard format which, no matter where the data is coming from, will give us the same answers?
And is it your intent that each person who adopts your platform needs to like make changes to adapt into your ecosystem, or are you trying to make it pretty easy to adapt?
So that's a great part. So what we have built is what we call as a last line input output exchange format, and on top of it we have been building something that goes on the line of HashiCorp's Terraform. What they did to server automation, we're trying to do the same for the world of observability. If you have data which is emitted from your servers, from your application in either open metrics or it's still sitting in some other manner, we built a layer of integration which allows easy translation of data from these sources, whether from Prometheus, whether from Datadog, whether from InfluxDB, and brings that into a format which is compatible with Last9. So I think that was the hardest and the first most problem that we had to solve. I mean, there were other challenges as well, but from integration perspective, that was the hardest problem.
When you took the name of the company Last9, I'm assuming you're referring to like the additional nines of reliability. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Was that a name that was like super intuitive to you, or like did it take a while to come to?
I think we had left the name. So me and my co-founder, this is our second startup together. The previous one, he had called it Uguay from Kung Fu Panda. And so name was always left to be the last item. And one day we were sitting at a coffee shop and we still hadn't come up with a name, but we had to. And we asked ourselves, okay, why do we want our users to use us? And we said we want them to use until they reach the last 9 of their reliability, which is a 5-9, a 4-9, whatever they're chasing. And hence the name Last9 came up. So it was probably just a stroke of luck.
So you mentioned how this is your second startup with the same partner. What was the reason you decided? What were some of the things that contributed to your relationship that gave you a lot of trust to do a second startup with this person?
So our previous startup was we were acqui-hired by a company. So, and as a part of the acquisition, he was the head of engineering, and I was looking at the whole operations and reliability. So we kind of were still working together. And when I got this idea, it's unfair to say that I got this idea because, idea is worth nothing. He came to me and one day said that, look, he's launching a new line of product and he wants me to go through the checklist of reliability, etc. And I said, that's it. I'm not solving this one more time for you. Let's solve this one more time for everybody. And it took a while and he said, yeah, that makes sense. So, we have to do something. We have found a combination where I've been working with him for a while. He's been working with me for a while. So we understand this. And so why look elsewhere? So that it just felt natural to it never even felt that we probably were looking for a different co-founder. It just naturally flowed into, there's an idea. What do you think? Let's do this. Okay, cool. Carry on.
I always find it interesting to hear these narratives where people team up with the same people, either shortly after or even years after, sometimes even decades after, just because I think the number one reason a lot of startups fail is the team falls apart. It's not even like a product thingy. It's not even sometimes it's a product market fit, but I think more often than not, like co-founder disputes are like, I think one of the top reasons why startups like just dissolve. So it's cool to hear those opposite stories where people like made it work, and not only did it work, they're like, hey, let's do this again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, like I mean, some of the people who are on the team, I mean, they're with us since day zero or day -1. Interestingly, are also the same people who were there with my first startup. So
Makes hiring easy.
I mean, it's not that way, you know. Like if you have a combination which you trust, why change it?
Right.
You know, like team is always ahead of an idea, is ahead of a business. If you have solid bunch of people who can trust each other, for the fact that even if they're making a mistake, the others understand that it's not being done intentionally. So they can rise up and correct the other person as well with both enough confidence and enough trust that it would be taken the right way. And once you find that formula, trust me, they will just come up with an idea, because creative people just cannot sit around. You know, like they may sit around idle, because I think being idle is one of the key ingredients of being creative. And,
I think so too. Highly unintuitive, but I think there's a lot of research to the back.
Like, oh yeah, totally. You know, like I usually ask people, what do you think is the most key ingredient to being creative? Boredom.
I think scientists did some study of people on their brainwaves, and apparently their brainwaves are in the most relaxed state when they're taking a shower. And that's why like shower thoughts are like a real thing. Like you get so much inspiration when you're in the shower.
Oh my God, you know, like I think that instead of standing desk, we should have like official shower times.
That would be interesting.
Go in there. So, yep.
Could you walk me through the path of how you learned to build those like communication principles with this team? Like how did you come to that point where you're able to build trust with one another? Like what did you do? What worked? What didn't work in terms of like the way that you just interacted?
I think I've failed badly over the years. You know, like the team just has been very generous and benevolent to withstand my styles of communication. You know, like I tend to be extremely, for a lack of a better word right now, I would say open and frank, but you know what it translates to. So, and I think it takes a while to build that kind of communication with the team where you're extremely open and verbose about your feelings and your expectations and clarity of communication. I mean, so there are two aspects of it. One is work communication and there's non-work communication. Work communication is where you and I need to agree on what we need to do. So there has to be a clear set principle of how do we do it. You know, like to double click on that, we kind of try to maintain a decorum of how should we use our Slack, and you know, like write extremely long messages as if you're writing an email. Don't get into the micro chat principle because it can be really taxing to the head of feeling an urge to respond right away. Then there are non-work communication, to which I almost encourage people to just pick up the phone and call me. You know, like text chat doesn't work, and I try to encourage a lot of FaceTime video calls, because in this async and especially because of the last 2 years how they have been, and I'm pretty sure that's worldwide, it's extremely important that we can see people and how they react and see what they are like, you know, how are they responding to a certain situation. Because I mean, we have had hirings where we never met people until very recently because of lockdowns. So I didn't even know how tall they were. So because they're always sitting on a chair, right? So I can't measure your height. So, and those things are extremely important. So apart like these basic principles of communication, that when you're having a word, let's try and keep our cameras open. You know, it's completely okay if the background is kind of not so nice to have, but But it's fine, so.
Okay. And how was that an intentional journey that you tried to like figure out your communication style, other people communicate, and like to combine the two together, or is it like more of something that just happened along the way?
I think it just happened along the way that these things have been constructed more as a need of the hour, lessons from failures of the past, and also like we almost started this company at the cusp of COVID. So, but we had a hint that to build a completely developed an engineering organization, which is like developer tools, that too out of India, would have to be, and that too out of Pune, would have to be remote in some manner. So we almost were inclined towards making it remote first, and then COVID left us with no choice. So a lot of these, so we probably don't have prior experience of running a completely remote organization, but we had no choice, but we had to do it. So we failed in certain choices didn't work. But the key thing was, are you proactive and quick enough to make amendments, accept mistakes? Yeah, let's try this, let's see if it works out. Oh, too much. Like there could also be possibility that some teams end up speaking a lot with each other, and while others have zero overlap. And so one team wanna say, too much overlap is happening. Can I just not talk? And the others will say that, oh, we don't even get to talk. So it's like playing SimCity. There's something or the other which is not working right, and you have to go fix that, and you want to make sure that the whole policy and the communication practices that you follow are favorable towards everybody.
How big is your engineering team currently?
We just crossed 20 people.
Okay.
And we are almost all engineers. I like to call myself an engineer. And
are you not an engineer? Who would not call you an engineer?
As I was saying, when your day is mostly spent in orchestration, I think you realize that every problem in the world boils down to queue management. Yeah.
That's so true, especially in engineering. So I imagine software development, especially software development for other software engineers, requires a lot of extra communication, and that's extra challenging during COVID. Like, did you have to build certain principles in terms of communication on top of what you just mentioned to me regarding Slack, as it relates to like working together as a remote team? Or teams, multiple teams?
To translate it to software engineering itself, like one of the key challenges that I saw, it's not really so I don't know if it falls under communication, but I think it does, was write comments in your code. Because you are in your zone right now at your desk, probably at the favorite time of your day. There's a lot of thought in your head, and the code is a net result of everything that you thought beautifully. Sad part is, I won't get to hear any of this when I pick up that code. So spend extra time writing more number of lines of code. So I don't know if it really falls under communication, but I think it does, because it's asynchronously going to communicate to me your thought process. And that's one communication thing that I kind of religiously advocate and say that, make sure that every piece of bit of software that you're writing has a decent amount of intent behind it explained, because I don't want to disturb you every time. When I look at the piece of functionality, I want to change that. I don't want to go interrupt people every time to say, hey, can you explain me this? Can you explain me this? Yeah, I could really go read that code, but we have to be cognizant of in what situation would another person be reading the code. It could be an outage where they want a quick fix, and at that moment they can't reach out to me because we're not sitting in the same office, or I may be stuck, or the internet may not be working, which happens all the time. And at that moment, the person would have to make a contribution. And so be cognizant of that. So that's one thing. Second was we also introduced this culture of writing requests for comment documents. Before you commit yourself to making something, spend almost 60% of the time just writing it out till you reach clarity in your head that, this is what we are ought to do. And it looks perfectly nice. And now let's just go ahead and do it, because that is almost the memorandum that will be accompanied with that feature.
One of my favorite books in engineering is called Clean Code. I can't remember who wrote it.
Oh, yeah.
One of the principles is the fact that you have to optimize code for readability versus writability, because it's going to be read 100, 1,000 times more than it is written, depending on how big your org is. Maybe less so for small companies, but still, it's definitely never one-to-one. You definitely always want to optimize for readability, and comments are part of that.
Absolutely. Great thing. Yes.
So do you look for engineers that have experience in site reliability, or do you look for more generalized engineers and teach them about site reliability?
So, I'll answer this question in two parts, and one of them is a funny way to answer that. So I do run into engineers at times, and they say that, hey, but I do not want to be a part of, I don't want to be an SRE. And what's funny is that, look, we're writing software which makes it easy to do site reliability engineering. And they usually respond saying that I don't want to be an SRE. Now, if you are an Uber engineer, you will not become a driver. So you see the point I'm making there, right? Writing a software for somebody doesn't mean that you become that profession, right? So, and I think it takes a while for them to realize that, look, fundamentally it's a software and a maths problem. And using those first principles, we solve the problems. Now, one of the applications of it is tweaking these algorithms for the problems of operational intelligence, which all practical matters could have been something else. When you join a fintech company, it is probably the first. You don't have to be an investment banker through your life to be able to solve that problem, because it's when you apply first principles, domain knowledge can actually break apart very fast and can really be tackled head on, which is why this whole ecosystem of startups happen, right? That every once in a while, a person who had nothing to do with that industry comes in and disrupts that. The reason is because they're not entirely that different, and domain knowledge is really worth nothing. They're just knowledge about years of tribal knowledge or bureaucracy, nothing else.
Would you happen to be a fan of Elon Musk?
I would have called myself to be one, but I know extremely little. So yeah, I know he lives in Texas as you. So yeah, does that count?
Because I feel like the things you're telling me right now seem very similar to the things he was talking about when he transitioned from PayPal to Tesla. You think that there's next to zero overlap, maybe 1% overlap between Tesla and PayPal, but over time, I think he's been just disproving a lot of people when it comes to the fact that people who formerly do one domain can't transition to another one. And it's so cool now that is there overlap between rockets and cars? Probably very minimally, but if you have the capacity to do it, then why not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, let me just take a pause here and say that, okay, I think this could be the highest point of my interaction, because you just compared my thought to Elon Musk, so I think I'll just shut up and go back home now. So, but damn right. I do believe that to answer the original question, what sort of engineers do we hire? I think people who understand fundamentally two things. There is software which is written to solve a deeper problem, which has an extreme burden of being accurate. And then there is another part of the software which has extreme burden of being shipped fast. Now, being able to transcend through these layers and understanding which problem requires what kind of software to be written are the sort of people that we usually want to look for, and I don't know if I made this crisp enough to consume what kind of engineers. It would be people who understand the software engineering lifecycle and they understand the economics of engineering. Like, should I be solving this problem? Because all of these software engineering is about trade-offs. There's never the right answer. You're always taking a trade-off between one thing or the other. People who can wisely and judiciously make those trade-offs, and I don't know how to really quantify that measurement. When you run into these people, you just run into them. You can figure it out that these people can make trade-offs. They understand the maths behind being somewhere in the middle of being too bad and too good, and at what point of time, at cost of what.
Yeah.
And those engineers is what I'm usually looking for almost at all points of time.
So earlier you're mentioning how people specifically and explicitly said, I don't want to be an SRE. Is there like a stigma against SREs? Like, is there a reason people don't want to become SREs? Like, I'm not familiar with this.
So the thing about, so there are kind of two floating perceptions of SREs around in the industry right now. One who find them to be too cool. They could almost join the Avengers. And others who see them as like coal, I mean, with no disrespect, but almost the same toil as coal mine workers.
Okay.
Like that, oh, this is so, or firefighters, better analogy actually. Like, you may just get a wake up call at any time of the day. You always have to be ready. You always have to be rushing towards the fire to douse it, to find where the problem is and everything. So, and this requires extreme quick thinking at times with a very deep understanding of systems knowledge.
Right.
There's a thing that, there's a classic difference between who are the real people who can actually become SREs. You can take fresh college grads and say, just go read all the possible ways in which a software can fail, and that's it, you are an SRE. It comes with really almost a decade of toil, having seen softwares run and fail enough. So it requires a special set of people who have lived long enough with problems to understand how they fail. No problem fails in the first couple of years. It's when you start hitting the depths of it is when they really start breaking, because very few have reached that aspect of the problem.
Right.
And that is when SREs really kick in, because these depths of the problem, there are very few people who would have actually had the need to go that far. And anything before that would look like toil, because it's not the toil of the problem statement, it's the toil of lack of exposure towards that depth of the problem. So the ones who are really into it can probably find answers fast, whereas it may take the other person even a day or two of running through Stack Overflow.
I think it's so interesting that I've never been exposed to that latter model you were talking about. I'm very familiar with the former model, like the Avengers quality, where when I was at Uber, I think there were not many SREs at the extremely top level, but whenever they sent an email, you recognize all of their names because there's 5 of them in the whole company, and they just make sure that everything just runs super smoothly. And they're kind of like the watchdogs. They are available at some level 24/7, at least on some duration of shifts. To make sure to narrow down all the problems to 30 minutes or less. I just thought that was really impressive, because I feel like if you didn't have the expertise, 30 minutes versus days when you're talking about the scale of money that major corporations like Uber deal with is very significant.
Absolutely. I mean, by the way, you said 5, right? Trust me, there were 3 of them and they wrote 2 bots. So, so the number was probably smaller than 5. Yeah.
Fake personas just to make them seem closer to human.
Or absolutely, it feels like a larger team, like, and you could always say, like, this is just one guy sitting. Yeah, let me check with my boss. Yeah, the same guy. So, yeah. So, I mean, yes. To give you some, throw in some stats here. Think about this. Without really going into the depth of it, we very can easily get past the statement when we say, yeah, 99.9% uptime. Let's do a reverse calculation around this simple statement. It's 4 minutes of downtime a day at max. It takes me 2 minutes to log into my AWS account with the 2-factor authentication token, and another 2 minutes to hunt through that bad UI. There is no possibility that if I was to maintain 99.9, I would be able to do it reactively.
Right.
After a problem has arrived. And this is what makes SREs jobs really innovative. Because, traditionally, we are always getting ready for our last war, not the next one. Because we are only exposed to the failures that we've seen so far, not the ones that we're going to see.
Right.
And that, I mean, it's very subtle, like when you start realizing that you don't know what the next thing is going to break at. And at the same time, there may be a fire at all points of time. So while you're dousing something, the very next question that you have to ask is, how can I quickly mitigate this? Now, this is what makes SREs important, because the next question that we ask as developers who are just writing code, we go back. But SREs, the next question that they have to ask is, where else is this failing? Because it's very obvious that if a pattern has failed here, there's just waiting to happen somewhere else. So because now you want to save the next outage. Because I paid the price in this outage, but I don't want to pay the same price again in another outage. So I want to look for where else is breaking. Now, say I even find that. The third question, and when my job ends, would be, how do I prevent this from happening again? So there has to be this innate love for automation, or as you say, I'd rather spend an hour now because I don't want to spend 10 minutes later.
Right.
Because I don't know when those 10 minutes would be called.
Right.
But today I have an hour, so let me spend that hour.
What are some of the other things you've been learning about the whole domain of site reliability within the past, call it year, 2 years, that you wish you knew multiple years or earlier in your career?
I mean, one thing that I learned was that I was always an SRE, even before I knew it is called an SRE. I just thought it was, saving your business, as I said. And so this is, one of the biggest learning that this has been. And second is, more often than not, I see that outside of these top companies, the FANGs, right? FANG doesn't have an Uber, so you could add that, or a LinkedIn as well. Now, for the rest of them, the challenges are slightly different. The challenges are, I want to scale fast. And while I scale, I don't really care about the cost of reliability that I pay.
Right.
I wouldn't say that we fail to understand. I don't know, is that a cognizant choice, or is that lack of, I would say, industrial education, or is just a time in which we are in the industry as of now? I don't know which way to attribute it the most. It is that while we are scaling up, we tend to pay the price either in terms of over provisioning our infrastructures, or the customer is paying for it by having a bad experience. And I don't know if this is a conscious trade-off that people make or are even aware of this equation here. And this particular lack of, I would say, enough content, or a very simple, when you put it this way, it becomes more obvious. And I think that's just the whole content which is missing right now in the industry, and more people are beginning to realize this. And it goes into saying that, when you talk about site reliability engineering or even software reliability, the best that you can do right now is a couple of books from Google, and which both have been written at their scale,
right,
and their tools.
Right.
If you start really implementing things from that book, you will struggle. You as in one would struggle badly, because they have been written by people with certain assumptions that they had, and using a certain set of tooling that they had, which was backed by their own support structures that they had. And they may or may not possibly apply for every other organization. And to distill it, to really make it really concrete, very simplistic construct that, look, at all points of time, there is something which is going to go wrong in the server, in an infrastructure. You can't have a 100% clean architecture,
right,
unless it's an infinite Turing machine. And until that point of time, there would always be something. How do we learn to live with failures and quantify and contain them and see them as what is really getting impacted, rather than just, and this whole thought process is something that I think it's a shift that which we are in right now, where we are beginning to realize that as the cost of reliability is paid by a customer, right, or the CFO, and it is a product first thought rather than just an engineering or an operations problem. A product has to cater into it. How does my system behave, and is reliability a property of it? If that made any sense.
I follow that. I think my speculation is that a lot of business leaders at the top of the business who allocate funds towards different roles don't see or have not experienced the pains of the customer experience, or they haven't experienced the financial loss at the early stages of the business. That's hard to justify investments into reliability, especially when you don't know how deep you want to commit to that. Because you're right, it is the trade-off between over-provisioning either on people or servers, or just investments of time of the team into that project versus some other thing that might move the product to the next level or move sales to acquire more users. And I think the limitation of capital is a lot of what people have to juggle in their brains when it comes to how they plan their company's growth.
True, absolutely true. Yes. It's still a cost function.
Unfortunately for now. It'll unfortunately for forever, unless you are a Google or a Facebook and you have billions of dollars in cash.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
So internally within your own company, how do you think about site reliability as it relates to your product?
Very interesting question. So we use last nine for last nine. If you're building a platform which allows making software run easy, we use it for us as well. It's like, as they say, eating your own dog food,
right,
or whichever way you want to put it. Because it could be a confirmation bias, I don't know, or is it genuinely solving our problem? That every time we run into a problem, how will I make this observable? Well, let's just use last nine. And so it kind of gives us that, it forces us to think features better as well. Because if the builders and the makers, I'll tell you, there's it's a great thing. I don't know if it's just an urban legend still, or it's still true. In Boeing, what they used to do was, engineers who are actually part of the plane are supposed to be on the test flight.
Oh, interesting.
And that's just so much amazing thing to do, because if builders are experiencing it firsthand, they would make the best choices. So have the chef eat their own food for breakfast and for lunch. And the dinner would be amazing.
Have you ever had a scenario where there was a bug in the platform that led the platform to be unable to detect the bug in the platform, which led to last nine not working as intended? If that makes
Oh
sense.
yeah, all the time.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
all the time. Every single day.
Okay. I imagine that helps you figure out a lot of the things that need addressing.
Oh, I mean, because as I said, like we're still going through our process right now and will take a while. When you're trying to shift a technology paradigm,
Right.
and it takes a while to shift it because inertia is a real thing, as we say, even if we manage to move it a couple of inches, it's success to begin with. Because convincing really smart people of a new way to look at things requires the thing to be truly right. Because they are smart people,
Right.
they're doing things, and you're showing them a new way of looking at it. And if they accept it, your thing really has to be better of doing something, So there's extreme onus because one is people don't want to follow, but these are good people, like your customers are people who are willing to try it out. And if they do actually end up adopting it for the real good and the long of it, it requires the thing to be extremely accurate and really solving those problems. So coming back to the original question, yes, it's going to take a while, and until that while, it happens all the time that we expected certain thing to work, but it did not work, and as a byproduct of it, even we didn't realize that we sort of went down. So for now, we fall back to the same problem that the industry has, that we do it manually.
Okay.
So or over provisioning.
So earlier you're mentioning, so there's, I think, one or two very famous ebooks that the Google team publishes about site reliability. So let's say you're talking to a college grad who just finished like a software engineering program and wants to become a really great expert SRE, call it 10 years down the line. Like, how would you encourage them to develop the expertise to reach that level?
One is to actually write a lot of code. Write code is actually a bad advice. Build software.
Okay.
And it's not just about writing code, like it has to solve a real problem. Build software. Be extremely cognizant of the need that the more you solve, the more problems you face into. I call this a curse of knowledge. The more you know, the more it's going to fail, because now you're past your beginner's luck. So move past that problem. Solve a problem which is long enough where you've solved it at a depth. So many times what happens is that you meet a lot of people and they don't have had the opportunity, I would rather say, where they end up actually solving the same kind of problems repeatedly in their career. Like they would go from job A to job B to job C, but they're literally solving the same problem. In one space, they're doing it for a transport domain, for fintech domain, for agri domain, but they're solving the same problem. They're not really able to go into the depths of that technology. If you solve a problem long enough, you start meeting the cracks of it. And being able to reach that far will force you to make choices and solve for problems, which will empower you to solve for the breadth of it later. So, point being, if you really want to become good at multiple things, the simplest advice is become better at one thing. And just one thing to the depth of it. Because it teaches you the art of knowing faster. Because now you can make assumptions around abstractions and apply those and move fast. And while being an SRE, this is really one of the key constructs, because you don't know everybody's every line of code. So you need to jump those black boxes with assumptions that this would be doing this part. Now let me go to the other part and see if it is really doing that. Okay. And be able to quickly make these abstract understandings of the system is extremely important. But that confidence and the right judgment only comes once you have had the exposure to a certain depth.
As the CTO of a company, what's the percentage of your time that's spent on mentoring or mentoring-like activities?
Honestly, I mean, this might be an answer which I'll give, which is applicable to me. So I don't know if that would apply to
Right.
every CTO. Personally, I love empowering people, and this is where I go out and say that go slightly into the sort of people that I work with as well. These are people who are extremely passionate about the work that they do, and all they have had ever missing was an exposure. They were just waiting to express. They did not get the right platform to express.
I see.
And with a bit of nudge and mentorship, I mean, I don't call it really mentorship, but more apprenticeship, because it's just about showing them giving them a playground, and where they can express themselves to these to a problem statement which is slightly more complex than what they've done in the past, and keep increasing, and they tend to pick up. And a part of that goes into constantly I'm trying to address and look what is it that they lack fundamentally in terms of exposure towards a knowledge, which goes back into the fundamentals of computer science. For example, if somebody is shifting from a language like Python to a compiled language, giving them a slight nudge towards type theory or how that aspect works would be of great help. Or if somebody is working on data science, exposing them to really simplistic papers of consistency or how data how data consistency works in databases would actually be a good exposure as well. So it's constant. I think it's like you're being a coach to a team, where you have to observe the fallacies and the drawbacks of each person where their form is missing, and then you try to correct that. And like this, if you could do this two things, I think this will help you better. And sometimes these things go outside of really work as well, or reading. It's probably a fix in their routine, which becomes very tricky because now you're assuming a liberty to tell somebody to fix a habit, and you're never really sure whether it will be taken the right way or the wrong way. But it may extend to that as well. Like, hey, I think you tend to get distracted. If you could just bring focus better, I think it will work you up less, and something like that as well. So more than I would say mentorship, it's more of a coach as an observer, that you have to keep observing people. And because each one would have a different need. So there is not really a mass curriculum or a program that you can build. Like, let's join this classroom, we'll teach 2 hours of functional programming, and then all of us become better.
So I definitely agree that there's no formulaic program you can apply to everyone. But are there overarching principles you use in your coaching?
Yeah, there is. I mean, one is pay it forward. We all are where we are because at some point of time in our career, somebody decided to invest time in us.
Yeah.
And that, I know this is not the answer that you're looking for. I'll tell you the other things that I believe should be done, but I think this is the foremost one. Convincing people that the best way to grow is to grow others. And because when you teach, as they say, 2 people learn. And when you try to express and when you try to say, you understand what you lack. And in the process of helping others grow, you are helping yourself grow as well in return. So the chain of paying it forward has to keep continuing. So that's the first thing that you have to really distill into people, that look, it's a constant cycle. You're never going out of it because you're constantly helping others and you are getting helped by others. So that's one. Second is how much important is mental and physical health to be able to do best work. And I mean, these are very, really, by the way, non-tech things that I'm talking about here, because I think in my top 3, 4, I mean, in my list of 3, 4 items, these stand out as top 1 and 2. You know, one, as I said, paying it forward. The second is being extremely attentive towards your physical and your mental health, and taking out time during the day to do some sort of physical activity, spending time on your take a mini break, take a flight of stairs, like cycle to work, take a walk, take a break, because we are paying a cost, and we want to pay a cost so that we can stay better for the long of it in our career. So that's second. Third is, now this is the technology part where I say, like the soft part is done. I do encourage, and as a part of my work style, where I encourage people to think, how can we build systems which work on single responsibility principles?
Okay.
And which is be very clear in the functionality that something is supposed to do, and make it only do that, and not try to over-engineer it with the concerns. And this is literally how the organization around it is built as well. And the last principle that I usually actually encourage a lot of people to think is, while designing the system, they must, and this actually is a lead from Conway's law in programming, imagine it is really people interacting with each other, and then build a system around that, and then you'll understand every failure around it. Like if I say we are building a system right now with you and I, now if I build a system that if you and I are interacting, the very first thing that I'll think is, what if David is not available? So the concept of reliability and availability kicks in naturally.
I see.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, this has been a very insightful past hour, and I just want to end with a final question of, for the people in our audience who want to follow you along your journey or reach out to you personally, what's the best way for them to do so?
You could, catch my Twitter. That's there. My handle is, I don't know, I'm saying it out loud won't make sense, so I'll just share it with you on chat.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll make sure to put those links directly on the landing page so you don't have to guess and check on the typing of the characters.
Yeah, right. So that's one. Two, look, I've been a founder for most of my journey. I've had my, I would say, streaks of failures and successes as well. I am extremely interested in learning from how others have failed or succeeded. So extremely curious to know what others' journeys look like. So reach out to me. I'm going to write my email as well. That's perfectly fine here. So yeah, I'm usually available to the community. So reaching out should not be a problem. I would love to hear.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time, Piyush. It's been a great time.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me here.